Well, gentlemen, we can begin. Wes, would you like to
Yes.
take it from the top?
All right. Thank you very much. Glad to have you all here today. I am zooming in from Lenape Indian Territory, which is now known as Manhattan, and I would like to recognize the indigenous land that I am upon now. And if you would like to, Miles, acknowledge in the form that you do in Australia, the indigenous peoples before we begin?
Absolutely, yes. I am streaming to you from Yagara and Turrbal land, known to them as Mianjin, but known to others as Brisbane. And sovereignty was not ceded for this land.
Thank you very much. We're here this evening to have a debate, a rigorous discussion, but also a conversation so that we can not only educate our listeners on the platform positions that you and John hold, but also so that we can learn more about the future of the party and some of the innovations and some of the things that we want to see happen in the future of the party. So my name is, as I said, Wesley Days. I am a conflict transformation facilitator. I work globally on group process facilitation, intercultural communication, global project management, simplifying value exchanges and designing for interconnectedness. And I've been in this field for over 30 years, mostly with the United Nations, but also with other international NGOs. I revel in working in the complexity of our world and conflict to help people navigate an uncertain world. And my work is motivated by the need for a greater cultural understanding and cooperation in the world as I design and deliver processes, frameworks, content, and theory about adaptive change and innovation, as well as supporting leaders, organizations, and networks in embedding operational adaptive skills in complex adaptive systems, which is why I'm so glad to be here today to help moderate this debate as our world becomes smaller and smaller through these technologies and platforms that we have available to us. I did have the pleasure of visiting Australia 2 years ago, where I got to know many of the startups and many of the entrepreneurial spaces, particularly in Melbourne, Australia. So it's my great to be here. And I would like for you all to introduce yourselves.
Well, my name is Miles Whiticker. I am the National President of Pirate Party Australia, and I ran for Queensland Senator in the federal election last year. I hope some of you will know me and recognize me. And my background is in tech and activism. I have supported a number of causes up here in social justice and environmental space. I'm a major proponent for climate change action, and I advocate for technology and technology-based direct democracy.
Thank you. John.
Okay, thanks. I'll follow Miles' lead and recognise that I'm here in Wallumededegal territory, which is also known as Ryde, and that the claims by the Aboriginal people to sovereignty here have never been ceded. So I'll also say I'm the current treasurer of the Pirate Party of Australia, and I was previously the vice president. I have stood for election several times, most recently as a New South Wales Senate candidate. But prior to that, I think it was even twice that I stood as a local member on behalf of the Pirate Party. So I have had an interest in activism in numerous different areas. One of them is secular issues around freedom from religion, and that was one of the things that attracted me to the Pirate Party. I'm involved in numerous causes. One of them is light pollution. I'll just mention that by the by, but I have an interest in pollution, you might say, and also economics, and along the way also intellectual property and those property claims to things that are, I guess, outside of the norm, sort of land and so on. That was quite interesting to me. And those were some of the things that attracted me to the Pirate Party. Now, I'd also heard about universal basic income and sort of various economic perspectives, which perhaps we'll get to later on. But when I did join the Pirate Party, I was very much taken with the universal basic income policy, and I saw its strength, and it was something that I was very fond of moving ahead with. So it's something that has inspired me, and I think it's a good solution that fits in with the Pirate Party, which I'll get to later, and something to focus on. But that's my introduction for the present.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And it is interesting, very, very interesting that you mentioned universal basic income. As you all know, we're going to have our general election or a final day of vote counting, as we're calling it now, because we're breaking records here in the United States with our early voting. Tomorrow in New York particularly will be the last day of early voting, and then Tuesday will be the normal general election voting, but we're counting the votes. And as we're getting to the point of counting the votes for this election, universal basic income before this election started was not even talked about as a platform, but because of particularly the Democratic platform, it has come up and it has been an issue. So it's one of the reasons why I was happy to be invited to moderate this debate, because there are so many different ideas that are coming up worldwide that we're going to have to be dealing with. But let's start off with some very specific to the Pirate Party. How do each of you see your preferred policy fitting in with the principles of the Pirate Party? And if you will begin, Miles, that would be great.
Thanks. Well, before I lead into a justification, I think this needs a little bit of background on the party, because most of you would know us as the Privacy Party or the Torrents and Copyright Reform Party. And for a while, there was a lot of that. But we quickly realized that as a party, we would need to, we couldn't survive as a single issue party. We have to expand and diversify our platform in line with our principles. We had to appeal to something that would succeed electorally, something that would actually function as a platform in government and not as a single issue party. So we quickly found that other policies aligned with our principles and other principles aligned with our values. Those principles of transparency, ethics, and evidence-based policy. Now, the basis on which I support job guarantee quite strongly is under the principle of evidence-based policy. And that's not a sexy principle to argue on. That's not very hopeful or utopian or idealist. It's quite technical and quite dry. And while I am an idealist, and I do have hope for the future, even though it's hard to come by sometimes, it's also important that our policies are rooted most strongly in what we believe will work, because we have evidence that will work, because that's the only way whether we know something will work or not. So I intend to argue that the particular policy which I'm in favor of, the job guarantee combined with UBI, and you can find the exact details of the implementation archived on our wiki, as it was formerly a policy of the party. I believe it has positive socioeconomic benefits, which are measurable and which we can see. And I believe the costs of this policy, economic or the direct financial costs, are minimal enough such that the pros outweigh the cons quite strongly. Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, Miles. John.
Okay, well, my emphasis in the Pirate Party is that we're about empowering individuals at the same time as we have a lot of concern about equality, inequality in society, access to services, the way the economy is going. And, we might well get into it later on, but David Graeber has talked about just how messed up our economy is, and there's a lot of other commentators that talk about that, in spite of the fact that I suppose the economy does give us a lot of worthwhile things. So we're talking about empowering the individual and worrying about equality at the same time. There are issues of privacy, the government involvement in our lives and so on. And one of them is to do with minimizing bureaucracy and maximizing individual possibilities and individual choices. So the thing about the universal basic income is it's about giving individuals money and power to make decisions in their own lives and go ahead. And it's also helping with inequality and equality along the way. Now, there's various economic benefits we might get into, such as removing poverty traps, providing people with incentives, and incentives can be a dirty word in some instances, but I think well applied, it does actually capture something positive and useful. But I know a lot of economic language is used to excuse privilege, to covet assets. These sorts of things do happen. But the thing is, economic language can actually help us as well. And, that's part of the story there. So, but at the same time, I sort of say, I guess myself and Miles really, I think if you look at our different approaches, there are some assumptions about how the world is going to turn and sort of assumptions for the better. Now, my assertion will be that universal basic income is actually simpler, less bureaucratic, clearer, easier to explain, and we're better off just focusing on universal basic income. And I guess we'll get into the stage of like how much evidence is there, how much speculation there is. I think both approaches do have some assumptions about how society is going to roll out when we make changes. I think that the package of things you're assuming that you're hoping for in universal basic income is simpler, and also universal basic income is easier to describe and easier to implement. But I guess we'll get to the details later on.
Thank you very, very much, John. And I think that it's important in this context to think about the pandemic. For example, here in the United States, the United States Congress has only been able to supply one stimulus package with an extension of basic income. So it is very important to think about terms. What do you think of some of the advantages that are not provided by the other approach that you've heard here today? I direct that question to you, Miles.
Thanks, Wes. And look, I just want to say we're all following what's happening in America, and here in Australia, we're following what's happening in America, and we're going through the full gamut of emotions where, we're laughing, we're crying, we're angry, we're exasperated, irritated, frustrated, and there's a bit of love there too for seeing the strength and the energy of what's happening in America in some places, and drawing parallels between what's happening in America and where we want to take this debate, and where I want to take this debate at least is the concept of the poverty trap that John mentioned. Now, the concept of a poverty trap, I'll explain it quickly. It's where you're essentially so poor that you can't afford to increase your income. In absolute terms, that's what it means. You're trapped in poverty. You can't get out of poverty because you don't have the money to get out of poverty. And there's 1,000 different ways this represents itself. For example, discounts for buying things in bulk or having longer term subscriptions. Like if you pay a 12 or 24-month rego, it's slightly cheaper than if you pay a 3 or a 6-month car registration here in Queensland. Not by much, but there is still a difference there. And for example, if you have a higher income, you can afford more reliable products. And those products will break less and require less maintenance, so you have to pay less in the long run. And so bringing this back to the concept of the job guarantee, we have to ask ourselves a really fundamental question. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve are we trying to achieve a specific policy? Or are we trying to address socio-economic problems? Are we trying to improve socio-economic outcomes? And I think that's the key point that I want to argue on here, that by the implementation of a job guarantee, we are actually improving certain socio-economic outcomes in comparison to others, whereas with a UBI alone, we're providing people the financial means to lift themselves out of that poverty trap. It's true, absolutely, and that's necessary. But at the same time, with a job guarantee, we're not receiving the other benefits. Now, to explain one of the key benefits as I see it of a job guarantee, this is a little bit idealistic, but I need to explain a little from my background. One of the organizations I've volunteered with up here is known as the Queensland Community Alliance. It's a massive grassroots-based organization of unions and faith groups and community organizations who banded together to achieve real positive outcomes by pressuring government and holding mass civil assemblies. It's incredibly powerful and incredibly empowering. One of the campaigns that I was involved in for the Queensland Community Alliance last year was very close to me, both physically at the time, but also emotionally in a sense. The campaign was around addressing the issue of social isolation within the community of those groups in that campaign. And this issue of social isolation expresses itself in so many ways. It's not talked about much, but there is in fact an enormous suicide crisis in Australia today, and based off raw statistics alone, it almost exclusively targets men. Something 60 to 80% of suicides in Australia are male. Now, the counterpoint to that statistic is that there is a much larger number of attempts by women, suicide attempts by women in Australia. So obviously, it has nuances, but this issue of suicide affects men and women. So going back to social isolation, loneliness is one of the main contributors, or one of the major contributors to suicide in Australia. And with a job guarantee, although it might not seem like it, our implementation of the job guarantee is a way to directly address loneliness, leading to this spiraling suicide rate. Now, the way the job guarantee works in our proposal is we put it out to what's called a citizen jury, and the jury is made up of randomly selected members from within a community, which could be 3 suburbs or 6 suburbs, or it could be half of a city. It could be an electoral district. It could be a whole city. It could be a bit larger, a whole state or half of a state. My suggestion is we keep it to around the size of a city or a bit smaller. And this jury of 6 or 12 randomly selected Australians from within that very specific small area then get to decide what those jobs are that the government will then support. So imagine this, you go down the street and meet your neighbour or your neighbour from across the road or your neighbour next door, and you chat to them and say, look, what are some problems in our community at the moment? And maybe there's a problem that the local dog park just has too many weeds and too many leaves blown in there. And everyone agrees this is a problem and the council's not addressing it. Maybe they don't have money, maybe they don't care. And so you say, okay, well, we want our federally guaranteed job to be cleaning up this park, weeding it, watering it properly, getting some nice plants in. And what's happening here is that as a community, you are actually organising yourselves. And the only government participation, and we'll get more to this later, the only government participation is actually providing you the logistical support to manage those jobs and the payments to pay the people doing those jobs. And the people doing those jobs are directly giving back to their communities. So by participating in communities in a way that is structured and meaningful and positive, we can tackle this loneliness issue and this suicide crisis right at the heart, right at the cause. We can say, here's an issue which affects the community. We all need it, and we are going to reward you fully and meaningfully so you can live a full, meaningful life. And at the same time, you're participating in the community. And you won't be forced to either. You are more than welcome to take the UBI. You're more than welcome to, at some point, join the citizen jury and design the jobs yourself. And of course, there's going to be feedback. And now there's going to be feedback on those jobs as well to improve them in future. So I'll pass it over to you now, Wesley and John, for your response.
Yes, thank you, Miles. John, I'd like you to respond. We got into some interesting ideas around social cohesion, particularly around the suicide. Would you like to respond to any of the ideas that Miles put forth?
Yes, I will do that. Now, one of the things to keep in mind with the Pirate Party is, along with the universal basic income, there's a commitment to supporting mental health and the commitment to supporting education. So while Miles is talking about the job guarantee helping people, I suppose I will skip a step and say that ultimately we want to empower individuals, give individuals that money and that ability to reach out into their community and find things that need doing and do them off their own initiative. And there are various assumptions that I think both approaches have about how we're going to realize that. But basically, if you are delegating things to the individual to make decisions, and the only amount of centralization you have is with the government implementing a negative income tax. Now, one of the things about the Pirate Party policy, universal basic income means different things to different people. We are not giving a packet of money to anyone and everyone. We are basically implementing a negative income tax where welfare is reverse taxation. And the nice thing about that is that the system is simpler and you basically give people incentives to keep earning more and more money. Now, one element of the poverty trap that Miles mentioned is the idea that you can buy better quality things which need less replacement. And that's, I guess, something of an intractable issue. But at least you can get to the stage where you don't lose benefits in a sudden step sort of way, which means you always have an incentive to earn a little bit extra and make a little bit of extra effort. Now, so I am assuming that there are other parts of the policy that we're going to use to help people in terms of their isolation. And rather than saying job guarantee, I do envisage the possibility of having a volunteer bureau. Now, in the ideal, you only have one level of central administration, which is rerouting the tax dollars. And to my way of thinking, if government only does one single simple thing that's really well defined, government will not get its way into trouble. So there's a benefit there. You've got the government there, you've got the individuals making decisions, maybe have a volunteer bureau. And for people who have mental health issues in terms of engaging with the world around them and working, okay, you can maybe do things under a mental health framework. Now, one of the things about having your volunteer, having job guarantees, is there is still an administrative structure here. And while we're hoping that we will have citizen juries, the fact is the money is coming from centralised government, and there will be a temptation for individual politicians to direct money to certain areas to get votes. There will be the temptation to basically alter the system. So I think, in terms of government rolling out large-scale bureaucracies, I think we can be reasonably concerned about the possibilities for that happening. But if government is only doing one thing, rerouting the tax dollars, implementing a negative income tax, and empowering the individuals, and the individuals can access the volunteer bureau, but in an ideal world, people are self-motivated and look at what they're doing. And I guess I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think people who grow veggies in their backyard and sell them at the local markets, people who make handcrafts and sell them at the local markets. Now, let's say there's different economies here, the economy of poverty and the economy of possibilities and creativity. And sure, people who grow stuff in the backyard and sell it, that's not as efficient as like being grown in a farm and getting to us via convoluted supply chains. But I still think that's in some ways a better option. And that's what we want people to do, to reach out into their community as individuals, look at possibilities, develop themselves. Now, some parts of the economy are pretty narrow, food, plumbing, electricity, things that need skills. But there's so much of the economy that can be done in a way which has, local initiatives replacing those large value chains and basically having a much healthier situation. So I would also say that, the universal basic income is actually quite easy to explain, easy to implement, easy to sell. And I think there's more courageous assumptions about the ability of government to roll out something complicated without it getting lost in the wash of, politicians sort of pork barreling and abusing it in various ways along the way. So UBI is simple, and I think there is evidence from Finland and other cases that supports the universal basic income. We can get into the details of that, but I will be curious to know more about the evidence that the job guarantee is useful. In the abstract, we know that a lot of people derive, identity from work. And we certainly want to enable people to lead productive lives. I don't think that has to be work. David Graeber identified a lot of problems with work in our current environment. And the idea that, even now, like the idea of work is like it's problematic. David Graeber has identified that. And now we're saying we have the current problems with work. We're going to have government roll out meaningful work that's sort of administered. And I worry about that. I think we could also say with automation and so on, we have to go beyond the idea of work entirely and say we want people to lead productive lives and contribute to the world around them. And that doesn't have to mean work in the way we currently understand it. So there's a lot of reasons I think that we should focus on UBI. Maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself, but the Australian Workers' Party does embrace job guarantee. The voters of Australia do have the option of voting for them. I think it does muddle the picture to have job guarantee in our policy set. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, John. Miles, it seems that John was talking about explaining what UBI is and the job guarantee is, but what would be your elevator pitch as to what those two things are without, what is the core detail that you would like to sort of give to people when explaining these principles if they're not as up on policy as you all are?
Okay, well, the first thing to say is that my proposal, what I'm for, has two components. First of all, I'm for a universal basic income. That's point number one. Now, the universal basic income, just a really quick refresher, in Pirate Party Australia, we propose a negative income tax, which means if we abolish Centrelink and we abolish disability payments and all connected payments at Centrelink, and instead integrate a universal basic income and we implement it through the tax office. And the way this functions is if you make less than the minimum wage and you then report that to the tax office, as it all should be, then you are paid up the shortfall. You are via the tax office. We call this a negative income tax, as essentially all it is adding extra brackets below the minimum tax-free threshold. Now, the second point that I'm arguing for is to implement a job guarantee alongside that. Now, this is the key distinction between myself and John. John wants a UBI by itself. John does not want my point two, which is the job guarantee. Now, the Pirate Party proposal for a job guarantee is this. We have a random selection of people from a region drawn out of a hat. Then they decide what jobs need doing in their area. And then the government will pay people who want a job a full living wage to do those jobs. And that's essentially it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Miles. Would there be any detail that you would like to respond to, John, in terms of the distinction between yourself and Miles on this principle? You can just give me 2 minutes.
Yes. Well, I suppose Miles covered some of it. With the universal basic income, you are talking about giving money to people, and it's basically welfare in a much more integrated way. You're talking about not having unemployment mean the same thing as it does now because you get money regardless. Now, and the job guarantee is saying, look, if you want a job, you can have a job. But I say that the way you would provide these jobs in sort of even with these juries, it just seems to me that it's going to get somewhat muddled, and really we should want to empower individuals to take that wad of money and perhaps set up, grow veggies in the backyard or something like that, or work for someone else depending on what's going on. But the other thing to keep in mind is with the universal basic income, there have been some tensions about how much we can afford and what it can be. Now, at its most basic, the universal basic income is at a low level. It gets rid of a lot of the problems with welfare administration, makes it a lot more straightforward, and it benefits in that way. But if there are jobs out there, then, you can work a bit and you never really fall off a cliff. You work a bit, you make a bit more money, and it tops up, in a sense, what you're already getting from the universal basic income. There's some benefits where you get a benefit and then suddenly reach a threshold and fall off a cliff and you suddenly lose a lot of money. That doesn't happen with your universal basic income. But the other thing is, as our economy develops and we go to a post-job environment, then the value of the universal basic income can increase to the point where really you can live a quite comfortable existence without the need for additional work. And we're saying, look, there probably aren't many jobs out there. And let's be real, in that sort of situation, you might get a situation, I acknowledge, where very few people get to work, and working is sort of, I guess, a privilege that is sought after. But you don't need work to live comfortably, and that may well be the world of our future. And the thing about the universal basic income is, at one level, it helps, and then as there are no jobs around, it changes into something that's much more, that future utopia thing that we think about. So there's also a certain practical issue within the Pirate Party. I don't want to focus too much on internal Pirate Party bits and bobs, but the reality is that a lot more people within the party are motivated about universal basic income. The number of people who are motivated about job guarantee are small, and those who are motivated get fired up about it, can move forward. And having the job guarantee around makes us confused and lacking in motivation, and causes its own problems. So in terms of selling it to the people, having a simpler story, this is what we're about, I think that does sort of does help things. So there's the practical issue, not just of whether it's good or bad, I suppose, but whether it will fire up people in the party, whether it will motivate us, whether we can sell it. So there's a practical issue there that I guess I'm drawing on. And again, that's, in one sense, you could say, in the abstract, what's good is good, what's bad is bad. It doesn't matter what's going on. But from a practical point of view, in the Pirate Party, there's lots of good things, but we have to pick our fights. And there's a certain pragmatism we have to mix in with our policy framework. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. And I'd like to direct a little bit about that, what John mentioned around the post-job future in our next question, which is, how do you see society and the economy changing in the future, particularly the impacts of automation? And your party is very much focused on freedom of information and technical innovations that are going to change the fabric of society. So how does your approach deal with these changes?
Thanks. I'll take that, Wes. Now, the question of automation is a huge one, and it's one which everyone is starting to think and talk about. The Australian Greens have taken a very strongly socialist swing in the last 5 to 10 years. The Queensland Greens, in particular, less so in the other states. But as someone who's heavily embedded in Queensland politics, I'm keenly aware of this. Now, automation is a massively looming threat, and it's something which most businesses are starting to implement. And they're downplaying the risks. They're saying this is good. We're saving money from this, but they're not passing on those costs, and it's resulting in less wages, and it's also resulting in job cuts. So where this impacts our debate and how this is relevant to a job guarantee is that with a job guarantee, we're rethinking the future of work. Now, we could go the hard route and say we're absolutely cutting work entirely. There's no more work. Everyone gets a UBI. But at the end of the day, we still need to eat. We still need clean water. We still need working roads or some kind of transit system. We still need electricity. We still need medicine and health. We still need the internet. I believe the internet is a human right, and this requires human labor. A large part of it increasingly is automated, but it requires human labor. And while our job guarantee is not set up specifically to guarantee the future of that work, to maintain our society, it is an ideal vehicle to begin to address some of those problems. Let's say, for example, that a region is supplied by food which is shipped in from here in Brisbane. We're supplied with food which is shipped in from Wollongong or Newcastle or Sydney or somewhere in New South Wales. Let's say we're shipping in food from Europe or from America. It takes even longer to get here, possibly weeks to get here to Brisbane, and it's in terrible condition when it does. What do? We've got enough to survive and to live off, but not enough to thrive. So our community says we want to guarantee that we have people working on locally grown and locally sourced food. And so let's do it. Then people are paid to do that. They implement that through our job guarantee program. and set up community gardens. And there is a strong emphasis on having regular people maintaining those gardens, planting at those gardens, weeding those gardens, seeding those gardens, and keeping them alive and functional. So whereas there's not that guarantee with the UBI, absolutely there'll be people under UBI who will go out and say, I'm going to start a community garden because I want to, and then they do. But it might be one person in a community of 10,000 people. It might be 5 people in a community of 100,000 people. And that's not quite so workable as compared to a job guarantee, where you have this vehicle for saying, here's what the community wants, and here's how the community is going to guarantee it. Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, Miles. Would you like to respond, John, about this idea around automation? You gave us a great segue talking about changes coming into the future, but specifically on automation.
I will try to talk about that now. One of, I guess it's sort of leading up to automation, but over the last 30 years, we've had productivity improvements that haven't been reflected in wages growth. And David Graeber did actually say, hang on, it seems like the people who take out the garbage, the nurses and so on, the people who are really important, and the age of COVID has shown us how important they are. They're the people who aren't making a great deal of money as compared to people who, I guess, manipulate arcane numerical symbols in offices in towers somewhere. And that's sort of telling us something about how there is something a bit out of whack with the world that we inhabit. But, as far as technology goes and jobs and so on, I think we've got a few strange threads going on. Once upon a time, you used to go to a robot car wash, and these robot car washes were also fancy and amazing, and gee, wow, this is amazing. Now you've gone back to hand car washes. You've got people you hire to walk your dog. So there's all these new emerging industries. And you've also got, your platform things like Uber and so on, and they sort of basically churn a lot of money around. And there is actually, bad social outcomes that, bad consequences that are coming out of these, apart from the fact that these platforms are centralized and mean, people can churn lots of money by doing these things. So rather than saying these things are innovative and wonderful, and in one sense they're innovative and they're wonderful, but they're also an opportunity for monopoly profits and abusing your employees in ways that are new and novel and perhaps weren't possible before. So, these are some of the changes that we're talking about here, that technology is happening. So there's not just automation in the sense of replacing jobs, but technology platforms doing funny things that we're still struggling to understand the impacts of, and that's part of what's going on. And there's also so much information going around, and corporations can keep tabs on us in ways that they did not need to before. And because the cost of memory is so small, it's just so easy to do, and there's no oversight of that. And that's sort of a bad thing. But, yes, eventually automation may well replace jobs in the grand sense. So many things. I think, some specialized skills like interpreting x-rays, they're starting to become automated. There's lots of things where people are being replaced. But clearly, collecting garbage, well, maybe one day that will be done automated. I suspect construction work, it's going to be hard to automate, but who knows, maybe one day. So eventually there may be a time when there's a lot less work and it's all been automated. But I will reply to what Miles did actually say. Look, our two models have different ways of being optimistic. Miles' model is saying we can roll out this bureaucratic administrative structure without things going skew-if. I believe in the potential of individuals that once they're empowered, look, maybe we do need some extra help to, I guess, give people incentives to cooperate and do those community gardens and do those social initiatives. But I think you have to look at our world. We do have a lot of community groups that do get off their bums and do try to do stuff, and that's in the current framework, and we only need to encourage that behaviour. But I don't think we need to go the whole hog of having job guarantee and citizen things doing that. We just have a little bit of stuff on the side to help people along, volunteer bureaus and so on, but we rely on the potential of people, once they're empowered, to start to look around them and apply themselves and do stuff. And I think, okay, I'm being optimistic and positive there, but I think Miles has his own optimistic, positive vision in his own way as well. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, John. After the brutal murder of George Floyd in the United States a few months back, we saw protests around the world happen. And I think it's important to ask a question around racial equity, and what is your position around racial equity as it relates in your country and with this global movement that is asking for change around racial equity? And I would like to hear each of you all address that question. Miles.
Thanks, Wes. Well, in Australia, we have some of the worst outcomes in the world for Indigenous peoples. We have some of the highest suicide rates, the lowest education rates, some of the shortest life expectancies, and other indicators as well. The largest proportion of Indigenous people in poverty. So there's been a lot of programs to try and address this over the years, with different amounts of success and different amounts of actual engagement with people on the ground. Some of the most notorious policies to try and address this have been terrible failures from some respects. And so I want to mention the Northern Territory intervention as one of the most spectacular failures there. But that's off topic, so I'll encourage anyone who is interested in reading up the horrific recent history to go and look that up. So my first response is that UBI is one of the simplest and most direct ways to lift people out of poverty. And John is absolutely right in driving for that and narrowing in on a UBI as addressing poverty. But my but there is that when you hand someone a wad of cash, it will, evidence has shown that yes, they'll go out and that if those people are in poverty or near the poverty line, most of that money will be spent on bills. Absolutely. And I think it's totally unfair to try and characterize people as saying, oh, they're going to go out and spend it on drugs and alcohol and other such crap. I think that's bullshit. Absolute rubbish. And the evidence doesn't support that. But I instead want to say, well, if we're handing people enough money to be self-sufficient, why is money the only thing that we need to survive and thrive in society? Why are we basing our future off this idea that we're all individualized components inside this great market economy machine? Why instead aren't we talking about communities and community-focused efforts? Why instead aren't we talking about people achieving fulfillment and realization? And why instead aren't we talking about people being supported to do the things they want to do, not just being financially able to do what they want to do? And so in addressing these horrific issues within Indigenous Australian communities of abuse and suicide and other things connected to poverty, we've got to say, yes, we want to address these socio-economic issues, but we also want to say how can we meaningfully give a future for all people in Australia, for Indigenous Australians alike. So what's next is a system where we can provide them the time and space, like government departments have tried to do and continue to fail, where they can say, what do we want to do in our community to respect our heritage and culture? What do we want to do in our community to assert our identity as the first Australians? What do we want to do in our community where we won't just be left alone by the rest of society, if that's what we want, where we won't be brutalized by police, where we won't be left to our own devices, but we want to fit into our community. We want to build our own community. We want to support that. And the job guarantee will provide the space to say, we're going to support you. We're not just going to give you cash. We're also going to help you design the future that you want. Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, Miles. I'll turn to you, John, on the same question.
Okay, well, certainly in Australia, we've got the bad outcomes for Australian Aborigines that Miles has mentioned. We have Black Deaths in custody. So it's not my understanding that we have that many deaths of Aboriginals by police in contact with them, but we do have the Black Death in custody, and we do have the way that Aborigines are treated, broadly speaking. And yes, I acknowledge that is an issue, and certainly in our Pirate Party platform, we do have things that do recognise that and address that. And I think I was trying to say that earlier that at least in the Pirate Party we do acknowledge the worth of supporting mental health, the worth of supporting education. So universal basic income hasn't sat in isolation. Now, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but there are ways of supporting community that we can certainly add into the package. And, I'm just saying that, okay, yes, we want to support community, we want to support good outcomes. One of going on a bit of a tangent, but the Pirate Party does want to remove bureaucracy in a obstructive way. And basically bureaucracy has been growing. You could say that certain things have gotten better over the last 30 years. We can cure more diseases. For a lot of us, fast food, holidays, and so on are more available. But at the same time, I have this feeling that bureaucracy seems to have grown more narky and petty over the last 30 years. So we've slid backwards. So there are problems out there. But I guess that one of the things that the Pirate Party is talking about is supporting live music. Now, this is going off on a bit of a tangent, but I say there are things in our package where we're trying to support people being creative and engaging with the world and doing community. And we have a few fragments of that sort of policy built into our framework at the moment. And certainly we can do other things to promote community, and maybe we should be doing them. But I question whether the job guarantee is necessarily the best way of doing it. And I recognise for a moderate number of people, they'll hopefully be self-motivated to do those community gardens and those sorts of things. And if you look at the world around us, there's a lot of cooperatives, a lot of recycling approaches, community gardens and so on, and they are happening all around us. And they only need a bit more encouragement. But, even in our current world, there are community initiatives that are happening all around us, and they're worth recognising and perhaps promoting. So, but I'll leave it at that. So hopefully I've answered your question there.
Yes, you have. Miles, a quick question about the citizen jury. Do you think that's a good idea? Is it something that you support? Should that be changed?
Okay, well, the citizen jury, and I'll quickly give a quick refresher on that. So the citizen jury is the idea that we have a randomly selected group of your peers, mine or yours, who are then brought into a room, assuming that they fit certain basic criteria, as in they live in the area, they are old enough to have developed brains and understand what's going on, they don't have a potential conflict of interest, and so on and so forth. And then they're given a question or a problem, and they have to try and solve it. So this is ordinary people coming up with solutions to problems which are sometimes not ordinary. Now, this solution, this idea of a citizen jury, we see it in the courts, and quite famously. Everyone knows how the court system works. We know how juries work there. But what if we take that idea and put it somewhere else? What if we say, well, look, we're tired of these people trying to solve this problem and it's not working. Why don't we say, let's let our peers try and solve that problem. Let's let our neighbors try and solve this problem, which affects myself and my neighbors. Thanks, Wes.
John. The question is around citizen juries.
Yes. So I suppose, yes, that's one way of implementing things. I do worry about the level of bureaucracy and the fact that the government would perhaps be feeding its money. Now, it depends on what you mean by a job. If it's a job, then you're paid for it. And if you're not actually paid separately, then it's just helping volunteers find volunteer outlets. So, I mean, this is a matter of what does it mean to be employed? What does it mean to have a job? And what does it mean to be a volunteer? Now, if it's called a job guarantee, that suggests you're being paid for it. So I guess the question is, are you getting paid extra over and above the universal basic income? Or is it just something you don't get paid extra for? If you don't get paid extra for it, then it's a volunteer thing. So I think there are some issues around the definition of employment and volunteer here. But yes, I suppose Miles does describe a scheme that I suppose in principle is possible, but I think it's needlessly complicated, and you do have to hope that that the government can carry it through, and that it would not be subverted by the politicians after it's implemented. And I think there is the general concern that anything that has a money supply from Canberra or from a centralised source, you have to be very careful about that, because it's very easy for that money supply to be, I guess, distorted and subverted for political ends.
Thank you, John. As we move towards the final part of this debate, I would like to encourage more questions in the chat for persons who are watching this, so that we can certainly address any issues that are out there with the person listening to this. But I would like for each of you to reflect for a moment on anything that you would like to state around your position or platforms that has not been stated yet, or that you would like to really emphasize or clarify about the positions that you feel would be important to the listeners on this platform. And I'll begin with you, Miles.
Thanks, Wes. Now, before I jump in and answer that, I'd just like to quickly mention we've got a poll just popping up on the screen now, asking if people would like us to keep going for another half an hour, or if there's things that we haven't covered, or you'd like to hear more of this dialogue. This isn't in the end of the conversation. We'll still be talking about these policies elsewhere. But if you aren't interested in how this conversation is going so far, then please make it known. Now, there's been some great discussion in chat, and I think I'd like to take a little bit longer to talk a bit more about the concept of a citizens' jury. Now, my friend Andrew Downing in chat, who is I recognise as a long-standing pirate member, has also got a lot of criticisms, along with John, on the job guarantee. And one of these criticisms is around whether the idea of a citizens' jury is democratic. And that's a really powerful question. It gets right to the heart of what is democracy, and whether whether the citizens' jury really reaches the outcomes we want in the first place. And I want to sort of sidestep that by backing up slightly and saying that, well, look, after a certain point, we want to be as democratic as possible, but there are some things which it's not practical, or it's not ideal to have it as democratic. And you're right, a citizens' jury isn't necessarily a democratic way to do things, because we are having a small but random selection of people. And if we have a community of 100,000 people, and then you suddenly get 6 people chosen at random to make decisions, that's not necessarily democratic. Not everyone's really getting a say there. However, it does mean we have other advantages, and the key advantages elsewhere is that it's really hard to have institutionalized careerists getting involved and introducing unnecessary bureaucracy and trying to sustain this system just for their own benefits. And so graft and corruption has been mentioned elsewhere as a big problem. And so with the citizens' jury, we can completely sidestep and avoid that. We have a random selection of people. So you have no guarantee of being given this position. And yes, I would absolutely support a full remuneration, full payment for people's time to participate in this citizens' jury. I would prefer not to make it compulsory either. I believe everyone should do their duty towards society and community and participate in it as much as possible. But there are 1,000 reasons why someone might not want to take part in a citizens' jury or take part in certain political processes. And I fully understand and want to support that. Thanks, Wes.
Any response to that, John?
Okay, well, I'll leave what Miles has said about citizens' juries and leave that be. But what I guess I will mention is the fact that around us there's a lot of strange things going on with economic analysis. Like, we might be concerned about productivity. One of the things that people talk about is full utilisation of labour, minimalisation of unemployment. But I would say a lot of our economy, the way it's currently constructed, is doing a lot of really strange things, wasteful things. So, like, I know it's in the US that you guys first figured out how to sell cars to people who already had them. So before their old car wears out, you sell them a new car. And I know it was Galbraith now, look, there's different economies. There's the economy of poverty, and people are struggling, and that is to be recognised. But at the same time, Galbraith was saying we have gone beyond the age of scarcity, where there's basically a lot of things that people don't need, and what we do is spend a lot of resources advertising to them so that they buy what they don't need, so that other people can stay employed. And when you start to look about the idea about productivity in the economy, about the nature of employment, and full utilization of resources, there seems to be something very strange with a lot of the economic picture. And I mentioned David Graeber, who was saying that basically people are employed in bullshit jobs, and a lot of them are in private industry doing stupid and useless things. And so it's not just like bureaucracies grow in government where people are doing stupid and useless things. But I suppose this is a bit of a tangent to universal basic income. But one of the things we do recognise in the Pirate Party is the growth in bureaucracy, and is one of the unhealthy things that has been happening in society over the last few decades. So what I'm trying to say is, we say, look, we're going to generate jobs, and the jobs that exist at the moment, there's something wrong with this whole picture that I think needs to be engaged with. So I think moving past the jobs perspective would be a healthy thing to do. And I think there is a strange combination where we talk about the economics of prosperity and possibilities at the same time as some people do struggle. And, that's, I guess, an important set of things to recognise. And at least the universal basic income does try to make life easier for those less well off. But we do have to recognise it's a complicated picture.
Yeah, John, I just want to go back to you 1 second, because to dig down on that a little deeper, I see from the government statistics in Australia that there is a 14% national gender pay gap in Australia. That as of May 2020, a woman's average weekly ordinary full-time earnings across all industries and occupations was $1,558.40 compared to men's average weekly ordinary full-time earnings of $1,812. And so I just would like to get a little bit, we've been talking about universal basic income, and I mentioned racial equity, but what about this gender equity issue, which is also plaguing all Western, the globe?
Okay, well, the thing about the universal basic income is that the pop-ups are basically made because you're a human being. You might go into a special stream if you have mental health problems, but broadly speaking, you put that to one side, you get that money regardless of who you are, what your background is, and similar things. So in that sense, the universal basic income is actually helping things along. And I suppose I would have to say that at least in Australia, there is a strong push towards, I guess, women taking on, non-gender stereotypical roles, working in the trades, working in mining, that sort of thing. And I think that is something that is actually happening in Australia. And look, the companies give that a bit of a nod, but it's not like the government's pushing either corporations or women in that direction. So I think underneath that gender wage gap, there are some positive developments, but I recognise it's not something I'm completely across either.
Thank you. Miles, would you like to respond?
Yeah. So my response to this is that we need to look past the pay gap and look past the whole concept of a pay gap, and go back to the fundamentals of what we're talking about, which is that we're thinking about a future economic system which completely redesigns the way our economy runs and how our economy interacts with society. And I think once we get ourselves into this mindset of saying that in the future, the economy is going to look completely different, we're going to be in a post-work future, as David Graeber and others put it, where there's no more bullshit jobs. There's no more jobs that are completely unproductive. There's no more jobs that are a waste of time and energy and space and only exist because of this current economic system that we live in, but no other valid moral reason. And so when you go to that context and you say, okay, well, we want work that is fulfilling. First of all, we want work that is rewarding for the individual in a way that isn't necessarily financial. We want work that is fulfilling in a way that makes you feel like you are actually giving back to your communities and yourself. And when we look at that, I think a lot of these concerns about wage and remuneration start to disappear. Because as John mentioned earlier in the debate, when John mentioned earlier in the debate that on a UBI, people are free to do what they want to do, that there's no more requirement to go out and do jobs they hate. Instead, they can do things they love, and they've got the financial freedom to do that. That's what we should be looking at. We shouldn't be measuring things. We shouldn't be measuring society success in GDP. We shouldn't be measuring society success in wage growth or wage rates, or even something like wealth inequality is a horrific metric to be measuring. We shouldn't have to measure that. We should have the basics needed to survive clear. We should have what people need to thrive be 100% covered. And so in that context, then yes, like it doesn't matter about the wage gap. It doesn't matter whether some people are paid more or less, because we're not tracking that anymore. We're tracking the happiness index. Thank you, Brian.
Wes, I just might break in there and say, look, I quite agree with what Miles is saying there. This is going beyond the issue of job guarantee versus universal basic income, but I 100% agree with Miles on that commentary.
Thanks, John. I might jump in here quickly. Sorry, Wes. I just want to jump in quickly. We've got a poll going on screen for those of you who are watching us live. The poll is asking, should we extend another 30 minutes to keep the debate going? And I just want to say we've had 100% response to yes, extend by 30 minutes. So I think everyone is, by the sounds of it, everyone's really enjoying this and getting something out of it. That's really great to me. I don't know what people think about what I'm saying, but clearly they're enjoying the debate as a whole. So we might keep going for another 30 minutes and see where this debate takes us. Thanks, Wesley.
Sure. Here's a question for both of you coming from the chat. Would the job guarantee be for offering actual career type jobs, or would it be limited to immediate community need type jobs? And would people working these type of jobs be paid in addition to universal basic income for either of you?
As the person who's arguing for job guarantee, I suppose I can take this first, and I want to contextualize this with responding to what we would do if we didn't have a job guarantee. So when there's a lot of great theory and discussion around what we could do with a job guarantee, and there's a lot of economic implications for different parts of our proposal. So what I want to suggest is what I personally want to see is that the jobs not be limited to low-level labouring type jobs. If a community decides that they want to hold debates on the classics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the old Greek or early European texts, then that's what they want to do. Okay, well, good luck to them, and I hope they get something out of it. If people want to hold debates around or hold events around mathematics or science or highly technical subjects, if they want to do things in that area and they think that's possible, then by all means, go for it if you think you'll get something out of it. But the key point is that it can't be busy work, obviously. It has to be meaningful, productive, but also it has to be actually viable. So if a community wants to have jobs which require a very high degree of skill and specialization, but they want to pay labor market rates, then that's absolutely not going to work. That's not functional. It's got to be paid at a quote unquote market rate. It's got to be paid financially in a way where it's appropriately remunerated. Does that address the question, Wes?
Yes, thank you. John, anything to add?
Okay, well, I suppose in one sense what Miles is saying is true, but one of the things about corporations or vaguely corporate entities is they have a location, an office, maybe some equipment, and so on. And let's assume that the citizen jury wants to start up some sort of a theatre putting on Shakespeare plays. Now, that's not impossible, but keep in mind, we're not talking about just paying individual actors or stagehands or whatever. We're talking about somehow hiring a venue and getting some sort of initiative going. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible, but notice how there's that tension between, I guess, the simple ideal of, you know, a citizens' jury deciding on local jobs, and the fact that to actually make some sort of big community initiative happening, you've got to do more than just pay individual people. And you know, I'm not saying it's impossible, but notice how the story is getting more complicated. And I think there was the question of would people working job guarantee jobs be paid in addition to the UBI? And there's a few things here. First off, I don't think we've actually thought this through that well in our policy, but I do say this is perhaps a semantic issue, but it goes back to the fact that if you're a volunteer, you're not being paid extra. If it's a job, then you are getting paid extra. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the way that we've got a very well fleshed out thing for our UBI, our universal basic income in the pirate policy. I'm not sure how well figured out our job guarantees, but one thing to keep in mind is there are versions of a job guarantee overseas, I think even in the US, where they do actually have this hybrid of people do a job that's part of the job guarantee program, and if they don't do that, they get a minimum income, which is less than what they would get in the job. So they've actually built in a two-stage approach and something like a universal basic income, but keep in mind our universal basic income is a negative income tax and so on and so forth. And I would also mention, a bit of a plug for me, I have written an article on universal basic income, which appeared in the Journal of the New Economy Network Association of Australia. I encourage people to look into that if they want to. That does contain a reference to some of these other job guarantee schemes. And yeah, I have to admit I'm ignorant of the details of our own past job guarantee policy, and I'm not sure if it sheds light on this particular issue. But there's a range of ways of doing this. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. Miles, some of our listeners are not clear on the relationship between the citizen jury and how or whether local unemployed agree to these jobs. Can you shed a little light on that?
I sure can. So first off, the first criticism people have for job guarantee when they first hear the concept is that they say, oh, we already tried that. We already had work for the dole, and we've had it since the 80s or 90s. We've had it again, and it's a terrible program. It's busy work, it's make work. It's just something to so bureaucrats can tick a box and say, yes, we're making the poor's work for their dole payment. I think that's a terrible way to look at it. And so a job guarantee can absolutely not fall into that trap. A job guarantee has to actually be absolutely be meaningful work. It has to be work that is relevant and productive and feeding back to the community. So while it's absolutely simplest to keep those kind of jobs to things that are more labor and less skill intensive, things like weeding and gardening, cleaning and maintenance, so on and so forth. That's obviously the simplest. So how does that answer your question, Wes, or everyone in chat, or does it raise more questions?
No, I think so. It was partly, we had two different questions that addressed that, and so I think that partly was covered in the first question and the first response, but also in what you said now.
Okay.
I would like to give you each a chance to highlight three things that you think that are very important to close on for your listeners to think about as we have brought these issues together today. So if you could just jot down three things, give you a chance to think about three things that you think are really important that your listeners need to know about your platforms, that that will be addressed here. And I think that's important because these are very complicated issues. When dealing with emergence of a post-job society, it is very unclear. People are not clear what it often means in the words to have a post-job society. People have a vague idea of what these unknowns might bring. But if you could sort of bring home in this excellent presentation that you both have given today, 3 points that you would emphasize around the positions that you would like people to know, not only for what ends up coming out for each of you in your leadership, but also for the party in general. And if you would like to begin, John, that would be great.
Okay, well, thanks, Wes. I suppose one of the things I want to emphasize is that the universal basic income can be different things in different contexts. I have said that at the start, you basically pay a moderate amount of money so that people still have an incentive to go out into the economy and find work, assuming that there are jobs out there to be had. Now, one of the things that we have commented on the Pirate Party is that in the Australian political scene, you get economic changes, which means suddenly the unemployment rate might go up by a few percent. And if you believe the government narrative, suddenly 3% of people in the outside community are now more lazy than they were 3 months ago. So it just goes to show you that the unemployed are basically a bit of a political punching bag, and that's the current context of the way our world works. Now, one of the things, I think there was a bit of a question about how much we pay in terms of universal basic income. Now, one of the things is when it's a negative income tax, you get rid of your poverty traps. The things are a lot more straightforward, a lot smoother. But, you know, how much can we afford? And one of the things about our economy is that I emphasize the story that our economy is about productive possibilities and possibilities of what we might do, and that money is merely a proxy for that. And that, you know, sometimes you will get economists talking about the real economy and the financial economy. And I think that is telling us that there's, you know, some deeper picture there. And I suppose I would also say that our economy and our current perspectives, you know, non-accelerating rate of unemployment, productivity, full utilization, you know, and also I think Miles mentioned the fact that we shouldn't just be naively measuring gross domestic product as some measure of productivity. But, you know, our politicians run around and say, oh, look, we've increased gross domestic product. And you sort of say, yes, because more people are injured and they've ended up in hospitals or whatever. You know, there's just so much dodgy stuff going around about the way we relate to our economy, the fact that so many jobs, even in our existing economy, are bullshit jobs because, you know, our society has somehow lost the way. And these are bigger issues that are also worth recognizing. And I think, you know, quite apart from what the Pirate Party does, we really should make a better effort to hold our politicians to account, because a lot of their stories are just so simplistic, it's not funny. And look, some of these numbers, you know, gross domestic product, productivity, you know, inflation, they are valid within their context, but people abuse them so much. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, John. Miles?
Thanks. So the 3 points that I really want to highlight, and I apologize if there's gaps here, and it doesn't fully capture the nuances of a job guarantee or the details of a job guarantee. But I think from a high level, top down look at what a job guarantee is and what it's for, I think point number one, which goes in favor of a job guarantee and needs to be hammered in again, is that a job guaranteed job is meaningful work with a meaningful wage and a fulfilling end goal, that it's not a bullshit job, and it symbolizes the beginning of the end of bullshit jobs. it ticks those goals, ticks those check boxes of saying this is what society actually values. This isn't just some meaningless metric about financial growth. So point number 2 about the job guaranteed jobs is that they're designed by the community to meet community needs in a way that a straight cash injection won't resolve. And we can try to, for all we want to try and resolve socioeconomic issues, if you've got a bureaucrat in Canberra who's looking at different metrics and thinking, well, on paper, what works to fix this problem? I know I'll do this, but the problem is in the Northern Territory, or the problem is in Cairns, in Far North Queensland, or the problem is in Tasmania, and the solution works in Sydney, or the solution works in Brisbane, or the solution works in Melbourne. No, that's not a way to do things. It needs to be meaningful and relevant. So point number 3 is that we should be starting to measure societal success with happiness and not with financial performance. In our current economic system, happiness is intrinsically tied up with our financial net worth and our financial performance, but this is destructive. And I'm hearing a lot of people in the chat who are saying that the gender pay disparity, the gender pay gap is an important issue for you. And I'm hearing you say that maybe I as a woman am earning less than a man, and that's not acceptable. And I agree, it should be fair work for fair pay, and discrimination absolutely should not be happening. And so under a job guarantee policy, there would be a meaningful wage rate. It would be absolutely fair. There would be no discrimination there. And for those people who find reasons why they're not able to do a job, or they don't want to do a job, maybe they think the wage rate is insufficient, or maybe they think the time's better spent doing other things. That's what the UBI is for, and that's what the private sector is for. So tying these 3 points together, we need to be looking at the future of our economy and the future of our society in Australia, and where we're going and what we're doing with that. And this point number 3, that we need to measure society by happiness and not by financial performance, is the one which underpins my argument, and I think to an extent John's argument as well. Thanks, Wes.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you had a chance to react to some of the feedback coming through the chat. These are, as I mentioned before, often emergent ideas, and our society and our world is changing at a faster rate than it ever has before. So clear communication and dialogue is more necessary than ever to be able to change all of our societies. And I certainly wish that for Australia. I wish that policy and change can happen in Australia to raise the indices of quality of life for all Australians. And I recognize the challenges that are there. And I look forward to seeing the results of your movements as a party going forward, and encourage that dialogue nationally, but also, as you have invited me to moderate today, internationally, this dialogue, so we can make a better planet as well. So thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Miles. I'd like to also thank all of the technical assistance we had to be able to make this happen, all of the coordination and logistics to make this happen. And I look forward to the next conversation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've got some thank yous as well. The technical assistance was provided by Bryn, who's a longtime party member from Adelaide, who also supported us with the National Congress there earlier this year, and did a fantastic job there, doing very similar kind of work. I also want to thank Brian Koo from Designing Open Democracy, which is a working group based out of Melbourne, but operating online digitally, as tying people together in these current times of the plague as they are. The Designing Open Democracy working group meets regularly. I believe they're meeting weekly, actually. And but I'm sure Brian's going to put some information in chat. And it was through Brian's network that he put us in contact with you, Wesley. And you've been a fantastic find. Your skills and your background is exactly what we needed to bring us into this debate and spur on these questions. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful, and I know John is also grateful. And by the sounds of it, everyone's been really enjoying the debate tonight. So, as you said, moving forward, there's a lot of hope and a lot of energy in the Pirate platform, and I really hope that can keep going. And whether the job guarantee is part of it or not, then that doesn't matter, because we have a full suite of platform and policies. We have our principles which we stand behind. And from my point, I try to back evidence-based policy, and if the evidence doesn't support the job guarantee or the UBI, then I wouldn't be supporting them, but I believe it does. And so for the time being, we are. So thank you very much. And we're going to be going to a splash screen and ending the live stream shortly. And you can join us if you're interested with chatting further on Discord or by joining our Facebook group. And please stay tuned for the Pirate Party Facebook page, as we have more announcements coming in the following days and weeks. And one final point as well, Wesley, I understand it's, I think it was 3 a.m. for you when you first logged on to do our setup. And so that's a fantastic sacrifice. And I know many would not be willing to go that far, especially considering we're not paying you. And so you've done this fabulous thing in your own time for us. So we're intensely grateful, and we're definitely going to hit you up again in the future.
Right, Miles, I echo that sentiment. So thanks very much, Wes. And also, Designing Open Democracy. I recently listened to one of their podcasts where they talk about cooperatives and, you know, the whole story about the Mondragon thing in Spain or wherever it is. That's a very intriguing story. And Andrew Downing, I think he sort of stuck his oar in towards the end of that podcast too, and we heard some comments from Andrew Downing earlier on from the chat. So, but anyway, Wes, thanks very much, and thanks everyone.
Okay, bring stream down.